The elk is still steaming. That's the detail nobody tells you about a fresh kill. It steams, like a coffee cup left out on a cold morning, except the coffee cup weighs 400 pounds and 10 minutes ago it was running. 8 wolves are standing around it in the snow, breath-hogging, and not one of them has taken a bite. Not one. A 400-pound meal, earned through a 2-mile chase that left at least one wolf limping, and they're all just standing there, staring at each other. If you didn't know better, you'd swear they forgot why they were here. Then, the smallest wolf in the group, scrawny, scruffy, looks like he lost a fight with a blackberry bush, walks straight past 2 much bigger wolves, straight up to the carcass, and starts eating first. Nobody stops him. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Oh, hey there. I should clarify, I wasn't the scrawny wolf. I was the guy standing about 40 yards back with a camera and an entirely wrong idea of how this was supposed to go, because I'd read somewhere that the biggest, meanest wolf eats first, the way a bodybuilder cuts the buffet line at a wedding. I was so confident in that fact that I said it out loud to the person next to me, with the specific confidence of someone who is about to be embarrassed by a documentary crew, a research biologist, and several wolves. I wasn't wrong because I was stupid. I was wrong because I was repeating something that's been repeated so many times it basically fossilized into common knowledge. And common knowledge about wolves is, I regret to inform you, about 40 years out of date. I died a while after that trip, for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with wolves, thank you very much. And I've spent a genuinely embarrassing amount of the afterlife since then parked at the edges of wolf territories, re-watching this exact scene play out. Different forests, different packs, same baffling order of operations. Turns out being a ghost is mostly free time, and I had a wrong fact to personally avenge. So that's why we're here. Let's fix this. Here's the story you were probably told somewhere between a nature documentary and a guy at a barbecue who watched one documentary and decided he was now an authority. Wolves live in a pack. The pack has an alpha. The alpha is the strongest, scariest wolf who fought his way to the top, snarling and biting and generally behaving like a nightclub bouncer with abandonment issues. Everyone else waits. The alpha eats first, takes the best parts, and the rest of the pack gets the leftovers in a strict pecking order, like a cafeteria line run by a tyrant. It's a great story. It's also almost entirely fiction, and the man who accidentally invented it has spent decades trying to take it back. In the 1940s, a researcher named Rudolf Schenkel studied wolves in a zoo enclosure and noticed aggressive dominance behavior, fighting over food, posturing, forced submission. He called the top wolves alphas. That term got picked up, repeated, simplified, and eventually landed in a hugely popular 1970 book that cemented alpha wolf into the public imagination forever. Here's the part that never gets the same airtime. Those wolves weren't a family. They were strangers, thrown together in captivity, the wolf equivalent of forcing 6 unrelated adults to share a 1-bedroom apartment and then writing a sociology paper about how tense it gets. Of course, there was constant competition. You would also fight over the good couch. The guy who literally wrote the book that popularized Alpha Wolf, biologist L. David Mech, spent the next several decades studying actual wild wolf packs and discovered something almost embarrassingly simple. A wild wolf pack isn't a gym full of rivals. It's a slightly feral nuclear family. There's the breeding pair, the parents. There are yearlings, last year's pups, now awkward wolf teenagers. There are this year's pups, if it's pup season. Occasionally, there's an unrelated wolf who got adopted, the wolf equivalent of a foster kid, which does happen, and honestly is one of the more wholesome things wolves do. Average pack size is somewhere between 4 and 9 wolves, though it swings way higher in places with big prey, like Yellowstone, where some packs have pushed past 15. Every single one of those wolves showed up to this kill with a different stomach, a different job, and a different amount of calories they desperately need right now. And that, not muscle, not menace, is the actual variable that determines who eats first. So let's talk about the wolf who actually goes first, because it's almost never who people guess. Fast fact 1. A wolf's stomach can hold up to 20 pounds of meat in a single sitting. That's the equivalent of you sitting down and eating roughly 70 quarter-pound burgers in one meal, no bun, no break, no regrets, and then being completely fine to go on a 20-mile walk afterwards. Wolves are basically furry long-haul trucks with built-in gas tanks the size of a carry-on suitcase.
Here's where it gets interesting. The breeding pair, the alphas, if you insist on the old word, generally do get priority access to a kill, but it's not because they clawed their way to the top of a violence ladder. It's because the entire pack's survival is built around them. Think about it from an evolutionary accounting perspective. The breeding female is the only individual in the pack who can physically produce the next generation. If she starves, there is no next litter. If the breeding male dies, the territory the pack depends on for hunting often becomes vulnerable to rival packs. These two aren't bosses, they're load-bearing walls. The whole structure leans on them, and evolution is extremely uninterested in your feelings about fairness when load-bearing walls are involved. So, when food access tilts toward them, it's not tyranny, it's risk management. It's the wolf world version of putting the pilot's oxygen mask on first because if the pilot passes out, everybody's going down with the plane. This is also less about anyone allowing them to eat and more about confidence. The breeding pairs simply walk up to the carcass first because nothing in their life experience has ever taught them to hesitate. Confidence, in this case, isn't dominance theater. It's just an accurate read of their own social standing. They know where they belong, the same way you don't double-check whether you're allowed to sit in your own kitchen. But, and this is the part that wrecks the whole biggest guy eats first myth completely, there is one group that frequently jumps the entire line, including the parents. Remember our scrawny little line cutter from the opening? That's almost always what's actually happening. Pups, even fairly young ones, are often allowed to approach a kill and eat essentially whenever they want, shoving in among adults twice their size with zero consequences. Why would the parents allow this? Because pups have the worst energy economics in the entire pack. They're growing an entire skeleton, an entire nervous system, an entire immune system all at once on a deadline nature did not negotiate with them about. A pup that doesn't get enough calories in its first year doesn't grow up smaller. It often just doesn't grow up. So evolution did something almost charmingly logical here. It built tolerance for chaos directly into adult wolf behavior. Adults that snap at pups near food generation after generation raise fewer surviving pups. Adults that put up with a furry toddler face planting into the ribcage raise more. Over enough generations, tolerate the pup wins, the same blunt way every evolutionary argument gets settled, not by debate, but by whoever leaves more descendants. This is less benevolent parenting and more brutal cost-benefit analysis that happens to look adorable from the outside. You take one step forward. You're a yearling, basically a wolf teenager, all legs and bad decisions, about a year out from being a pup yourself. The kill is right there. Your stomach has been making sounds since this morning that frankly concerned you. You start to move in, a pup darts past you, practically under your legs, and gets first access to the soft underside of the carcass. You don't growl, you don't posture, you just wait, because somewhere in you, encoded by about 40,000 generations of ancestors who did the exact same thing, is the understanding that this is simply how it goes. The pup isn't winning a fight. There was no fight. There was never going to be a fight. You'll eat, you're just eating second or third or somewhere in the rotation, not because anyone's punishing you, but because your body can survive a missed meal far better than a growing pup's can. And frankly, your role this season is mostly future hunter, not current priority. It's not personal, it's a budget meeting and you're not the line item that's about to go over. Here's a detail wildlife documentaries love to skip entirely, probably because it's disgusting and I respect that editorial choice, but I am dead and therefore unbothered by good taste. Sometimes the pups aren't even eating off the carcass directly. Adult wolves, often including non-breeding pack members, not just the parents, will gorge themselves at a kill, travel back to the den, and then regurgitate partially digested meat for the pups waiting there. I want you to sit with that for a second. Evolution looked at the problem of how do we feed helpless babies who can't travel to the food, considered several options, and landed on takeout delivery via stomach. And it works incredibly well. It lets adults travel miles from a den to hunt, gorge on a kill far from home, and still bring food back in a form pups can actually digest, since a young pup's gut isn't ready for raw chunks of elk the way an adult's is. This is less questionable parenting choice and more the most efficient food transport system available without opposable thumbs or Tupperware. Myth 1, true or false? Myth, wolves fight to the death over food, biting and battling until a winner emerges and takes the carcass. False. Mostly false anyway, and the mostly matters. Within an established family pack, serious injurious fighting over food is rare. Most of what looks like conflict is actually ritualized. A stiff posture here, a curled lip there, a low growl that means personal space rather than prepare for war. Wolves have an entire vocabulary of body language specifically designed to settle disputes without anyone bleeding. Because here's the cold biological truth nobody puts in the inspirational montage. An injured wolf is often a dead wolf. A torn muscle or a punctured lung doesn't heal in the wild the way it does on your couch with a heating pad and daytime television. So genuine fights, the kind with real damage, are saved for genuinely serious situations, territorial disputes between rival packs where the stakes are existential, not who gets the liver.
Verdict: busted, with an asterisk the size of a barn. This is the part that, frankly, would have saved me a lot of confusion if I'd known it while alive. Dominance in a wolf pack mostly isn't expressed through aggression, it's expressed through confidence. And confidence, weirdly, looks a lot like calm. A high-ranking wolf doesn't need to growl at a lower-ranking one to get access to food, the same way your boss doesn't need to shout to get the good parking spot. They just walk up, posture upright, tail up, ears forward, the wolf equivalent of strolling into a room like you own it, because structurally, you basically do. A subordinate wolf reads that posture instantly and yields space, often before any contact happens at all. Lower-ranking wolves, meanwhile, communicate "I'm not challenging you" through an entirely different toolkit. Lowered body, tail tucked, ears back, sometimes a deliberate, almost theatrical licking of the higher-ranking wolf's muzzle. That last one looks like affection to a human observer, and honestly, it might be partly that too, but it's also doing real social work, a built-in handshake that says "we're good" without anybody needing to escalate. This is less violent power struggle and more an extremely well-rehearsed office where everyone already knows the seating chart. In long-term studies of wild wolf packs, including decades of observation on Isle Royale in Lake Superior and extensive work in Yellowstone since wolves were reintroduced there in 1995, researchers have repeatedly documented the same pattern. Feeding order correlates far more strongly with family role and energy need than with raw physical dominance. Yellowstone's reintroduction alone has produced one of the most thoroughly studied wild wolf populations in history, with researchers tracking individual wolves across multiple generations. To make that meaningful, imagine if every family on your street had been filmed, tagged, and tracked for 30 straight years, including which kid got the last slice of pizza and why. That's roughly the level of data we're sitting on for wolves, and it overwhelmingly tells the same story. These aren't gladiators, they're households. Speaking of households, let's talk about what happens when the kill itself is the deciding factor, not the wolf. Here's a detail that gets flattened out of the alpha eats first story completely. Feeding order isn't fixed. It shifts depending on what's actually on the ground. Take down something small, a snowshoe hare, a beaver, and there's genuinely not enough meat to share politely. In those situations, the breeding pair and higher-ranking pack members are far more likely to eat first and eat fast, because there's a real possibility some pack members simply don't get fed from that particular kill, and the parent's survival is non-negotiable for the pack's future. Take down something enormous, a full-grown moose, which can weigh over 1,000 pounds of meat, bone, and organs. The entire calculation changes. There's so much meat that hierarchy mostly stops mattering. Multiple wolves feed simultaneously, spread around the carcass like diners at a buffet that genuinely has enough for everyone, because for once, it actually does. This is less fixed caste system and more supply and demand, except nobody in the pack took an economics class, and they're somehow better at reading the market than most humans with a finance degree. Fast fact 2. A pack of wolves can consume an entire adult elk, easily 500 pounds or more of meat, bone, and organs within roughly a day, sometimes far less if the pack is large and hungry. Picture an entire dining hall's worth of food disappearing before your lunch break ends. That's not exaggeration, that's Tuesday. Let's talk about what's happening behind a wolf's eyes while all this is unfolding, because this is where I have to be honest with you about the difference between what we know and what we're guessing. What's known from direct observation and physiological study, wolves experience genuine, measurable stress around contested resources, detectable by behavior and through stress hormone levels in studied populations. A hungry wolf approaching a kill where multiple hungry packmates are also waiting is at minimum running a constant background calculation, proximity, posture, who's where, who outranks whom in this specific context. What's likely, based on behavioral patterns, wolves appear to track individual relationships within the pack, not just a single fixed rank order. A wolf might consistently yield to one specific packmate while holding ground against another, suggesting something closer to a web of personal relationships than a strict numbered ladder. What's hypothesized and genuinely still debated among researchers, how much of this involves anything resembling planning or whether it's almost entirely fast instinctive reading of body language with no real thinking it through involved at all. Scientists honestly are split, and anyone who tells you with total confidence that wolves are strategizing in a human-like sense is selling you a more exciting headline than the actual data supports. What we should not do is imagine a wolf calculating social chess moves the way a person might. It's almost certainly faster and more instinctive than that, less premeditated planning, more like flinching away from a hot stove, except the stove is a packmate's stiffened posture. If you ever do find yourself near a wolf pack, and statistically you almost certainly never will, because wild wolves overwhelmingly avoid humans, the feeding order is written in the body language before a single bite happens. A raised, stiff tail signals confidence and often higher status in that moment. A tucked tail, low and curled toward the belly, signals submission or anxiety. Ears forward and up generally mean alert confidence. Ears flattened back against the skull generally mean appeasement or fear.
Here's the twist documentaries rarely mention. These signals shift constantly, sometimes within seconds, because rank in a wolf pack isn't a fixed title etched into stone. It's a live reading, updated moment to moment based on context, like a stock ticker for social standing. A wolf that's confident near the den might read as nervous near a contested carcass with a bigger packmate 2 steps away. Same wolf, completely different signals, completely different moment. This is less permanent crown and more constantly refreshing leaderboard. And somehow, none of the wolves involved seemed nearly as stressed about it as you'd expect from creatures running a live leaderboard for a living. Everything we've covered assumes a pack, but wolves don't always live in one. Roughly somewhere around 10 to 20% of wolves in many studied populations are at any given time dispersers, lone wolves who've left their birth pack to find new territory or a new mate, sometimes traveling staggering distances, with some documented dispersal journeys covering several hundred miles. For a lone wolf, the entire feeding hierarchy question becomes irrelevant because there's nobody to negotiate with. But it comes at a brutal cost. Lone wolves have to hunt prey, sometimes prey as large as an elk entirely without backup. Pack hunting isn't just social, it's a genuine force multiplier, letting wolves take down animals many times their individual body weight by working in coordinated groups. A lone wolf attempting the same kill is taking on dramatically higher personal risk with no packmates to help finish the job, or frankly, to share the workload of finishing off prey that can very seriously injure a wolf with a single well-placed kick. So a lone wolf eating first isn't a privilege, it's a survival tax paid for isolation and risk. There's no line to cut because there's no line at all. Researchers studying wolf hunting success rates have found that hunts frequently fail. Wolves often succeed in only a fraction of their attempts, meaning many, sometimes most hunting pursuits end without a kill at all. To make that statistic land, imagine showing up to work and only getting paid for 1 out of every 3 or 4 shifts, except your paycheck is also your only food, and missing too many paychecks in a row doesn't mean an awkward budgeting conversation. It means you might not survive the season. That single fact reframes this entire video. Every feeding order squabble we've discussed only happens on the rare occasions when the hunt actually worked. Most of the time, there's no carcass to argue about at all, just a pack of very tired, very hungry wolves regrouping to try again. Which, speaking of regrouping, brings us to one of the strangest little traditions in the wolf world. You'd think the howling happens because of the food, a dinner bell calling everyone in.
It's actually often the opposite. Group howls frequently happen before a hunt, not after, functioning partly as a bonding ritual and a way of reaffirming the pack's cohesion before a high-stakes, high-risk activity. Think of it less like a dinner bell and more like a sports team doing a pre-game huddle, except the stakes of losing can occasionally include actual physical injury or death, and there's no rematch next week if it goes badly. Howling also serves a separate, very practical function, broadcasting territory to rival packs, since wolf howls can travel for several miles under the right conditions. Two completely different jobs, one sound, and humans spent a very long time assuming it was just spooky background noise for werewolf movies. Myth 2, true or false? Myth, wolves howl at the moon. False, and I genuinely don't know how this one got so much cultural mileage. Wolves howl at night because that's largely when they're active, not because the moon is involved in any meaningful way. They'll howl on a moonless, pitch-black, overcast night just as readily. The moon just happened to be a convenient prop in the background of a lot of old paintings, and nobody bothered correcting the record for a few centuries. Verdict? Busted. The moon is, shockingly, not paying attention to any of this. I promised you scientific honesty, so let's give the old myth its one fair moment in court. In genuinely unrelated wolves forced together, captivity, rehabilitation centers, or rare unstable pack situations after a brearing pair dies and the social structure destabilizes, you can actually see more aggressive competitive feeding behavior that looks closer to the old alpha stereotype. Without an established family hierarchy built on actual kinship, wolves sometimes do fall back on more contested, tense dynamics over resources, including food. This matters because it tells us something important. The calm, cooperative feeding order we've spent this whole video describing isn't some magic property of wolfness in general. It's specifically a feature of family structure. Strip away the family and you get something closer to that old debunked image, which honestly should tell you everything about how much civility in nature depends on who you're actually related to. A lesson that frankly applies depressingly well to family gatherings of a certain other species I won't name in this script. You take one step forward and everything stops. Imagine you're observing a pack at a fresh kill, the way I did, except hopefully with better information than I had. The wolves are eating in their established rotation, breeding pairs settled in, a pup wedged underneath an adult's chin, when suddenly every head lifts at once, ears forward, body still. A low, almost subsonic rumble starts somewhere in a few throats. A rival pack's scent, or possibly the pack itself, has been detected nearby.
In an instant, the entire internal feeding hierarchy you just spent 10 minutes learning about becomes irrelevant. Every wolf, regardless of rank, regardless of who ate first 30 seconds ago, orients toward the threat as a unit. This is the part that wildlife shows love to show you in slow motion with dramatic music, and for once, the drama is earned, because territorial conflicts between rival wolf packs are one of the leading causes of wolf mortality in the wild, sometimes deadlier than starvation itself. The internal pecking order was never really about power, it was about keeping the family functional enough to survive the much bigger, much scarier threat standing just outside the trees. Fast fact 3. Wolves can run at sustained speeds that would make most human marathon runners weep quietly into their hydration packs, and they can maintain a fast trot for miles at a stretch without needing the kind of recovery break a human distance runner would require. Evolution essentially built a creature whose resting heart rate handles what your cardio day handles, then asked it to do that for breakfast. Here's a question that doesn't get asked enough. If lower-ranking pack members sometimes eat last, sometimes eat less, why don't they just leave and go it alone? Some do eventually. That's literally where dispersers come from. But sticking around as a subordinate, even with reduced food access in lean moments, is often still the better mathematical bet. Pack hunting success rates for large prey are dramatically higher than solo hunting success rates. A wolf eating third in line off a 1,000-pound moose is still, in total calories, almost certainly doing better than a lone wolf eating first off of nothing, because the hunt failed without backup. This is the part that's genuinely, quietly brilliant about pack structure. It's not a tyranny, it's logistics with fur. I told you pups usually get to eat first.
I lied a little, in the way that all good simplifications lie a little, by leaving out the exception that actually proves the rule is more nuanced than it sounds. In times of serious food scarcity, a harsh winter, a string of failed hunts, a territory that's been overhunted, that pup first tolerance can break down. Pup survival in genuinely lean years drops, sometimes sharply, and not every pup born in spring makes it to the following winter. Nature's tolerance for chaos at the dinner table has limits, and those limits are set by how much food is actually available, not by how cute the chaos is. This is the part that the campfire story version of nature always leaves out, and I'm not going to leave it out, because pretending nature is endlessly gentle does animals a disservice. It's not gentle, it's efficient. Sometimes those look the same, sometimes they very much don't. One more detail that gets buried under all this hierarchy talk. The breeding female's body undergoes serious physical strain during and after pregnancy and nursing, and pack members, including the breeding male and even non-breeding helpers, frequently prioritize feeding her during this window far beyond any general rank explanation. This isn't really about hierarchy at all. It's about a temporary, biologically urgent need recognized and accommodated by the whole group, the same instinctive way you'd probably let a heavily pregnant friend take the last seat on a crowded train without anyone needing to hold a vote about it. Calling this alpha privilege misses the actual mechanism entirely. It's not privilege, it's triage. Wolf pups are born blind, deaf, and almost entirely helpless, weighing roughly 1 pound at birth, and depend completely on milk and eventually regurgitated meat for the first several weeks of life before they can join the broader pack's feeding routine at all. To make that meaningful, that's a creature that will, within about a year, be capable of helping take down an animal 20 times its adult body weight, built almost entirely from milk and pre-chewed regurgitated elk. If that's not the most dramatic glow-up in the entire animal kingdom, I genuinely don't know what is. Myth 3. True or false? Myth. The omega wolf is a permanently bullied scapegoat abused by the rest of the pack. Complicated. Some early observations, again mostly from captive, unrelated wolf groups, did describe a lowest-ranking individual receiving more aggression and less food access, sometimes labeled an omega. But in wild family packs, this kind of permanent scapegoat role appears far less consistently, and many wild packs show no clearly defined omega at all. Where lower status behavior does appear in wild packs, it's often more fluid and situational than a fixed, miserable lifetime role. Verdict: partially true in specific, mostly unnatural conditions, overstated and oversimplified as a universal wolfpack rule.
I know what you're doing right now. You're mentally mapping this onto your workplace. The breeding pair is your manager, the pups are the new hires who somehow get all the attention, the yearlings are you, doing the actual work, waiting your turn. Resist that urge, because here's the difference that makes the comparison collapse. Every single wolf in that pack is, almost always, biologically related, and they share a genetic stake in each other's survival that your coworkers, statistically, do not. A pup surviving isn't just the boss's kid getting special treatment, it's the literal continuation of the genetic project every adult in that pack is, evolutionarily speaking, invested in. There's no equivalent incentive keeping you from eating the last slice of break room pizza before your coworker gets to it. This is less corporate hierarchy and more family dinner where everyone secretly knows the bloodline depends on the kid getting fed first, which, now that I say it out loud, is somehow both wholesome and significantly weirder than I expected it to sound. Fast Fact 4. Wolf territories can range from under 50 square miles to well over 1,000, depending on prey density. In areas with sparse prey, a single pack might need a hunting range larger than some small countries just to find enough food to keep the family fed. Imagine your entire grocery shopping trip requiring you to personally patrol an area the size of Rhode Island. That's a fairly normal Tuesday for a wolf in low prey terrain. Let's circle back to where we started, because I owe you the actual answer, fully assembled now instead of in pieces.
That scrawny pup who walked past two much bigger wolves and ate first wasn't winning a fight nobody else wanted to have. He was being fed by a system built over tens of thousands of years specifically to prioritize him, because his survival mattered more in that exact biological moment than anyone else's pride. The breeding pair, who could have shoved him aside without much effort, didn't, because shoving him aside was never actually in their evolutionary interest. The yearlings waited, not out of fear, but because waiting was, on average, across thousands of generations, the better bet. And somewhere off in the trees, a rival pack's scent could change every single one of those dynamics in under a second, because the only thing more important than today's dinner is tomorrow's territory. I stood there with my camera 40 yards back, completely wrong about every assumption I'd walked in with, and honestly, that's still one of my favorite moments of being alive, even though it ended with me being humiliated in front of a research biologist who, to her credit, was extremely polite about it. Here's what I'd tell you if you ever find yourself anywhere near wild wolves, or honestly, just anywhere near wild anything, because most of these generalize further than people expect. 1. Forget alpha. If you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, talk about breeding pairs and family structure. You'll instantly sound more credible than 90% of nature documentaries made before the 2000s. 2. Feeding order is about need and confidence, not violence. The calmest animal in the room is usually the one most secure in its position, not the one most prepared to fight for it. 3. If you ever observe wild wolves, keep your distance, no exceptions. Wild wolves overwhelmingly avoid humans on their own, and the safest interaction is always the one that never happens up close. Admire from far away. Use a long lens, not a short fuse. 4. Never approach a den or a kill site, even from a distance that feels safe to you. You will never correctly judge safe distance as well as the wolves judge it, and they're the ones with the territorial instincts and the much better hearing. 5. If you're hiking in wild wolf territory, making your presence known through noise is generally far more effective in avoiding an encounter than trying to be quiet and sneak past unnoticed. Surprising a wild animal is almost always worse than announcing yourself. 6. Most hunts fail. Most days are hungry days, even for a fully grown, fully capable wolf. Next time you're annoyed about a missed lunch, remember that a wolf might be on its 4th failed hunt of the week and still showing up tomorrow to try again. 7. The most dominant-looking behavior you'll witness is often not aggression at all. It's confidence, which it turns out is true in more species than just this one, including the one reading this list right now. I genuinely wish I'd known all of this before I stood in that snow being smugly, confidently wrong. But then again, if I'd known it, I probably wouldn't have spent so much of the afterlife chasing down the real answer, and you and I wouldn't be here, by a fire I no longer technically need, having this conversation. So, that's the pack. That's the feast. That's the steaming elk, the scrawny pup, the patient yearlings, and the parents who built the whole quiet, brutal, surprisingly fair system that keeps it all running. Eternity's long. I'll be out here watching the next one. If you want more